Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamualaikum. Ji ayanum. Pakhairagale. Ni hao. Chunashume. Washmale. Ohai gozaimasu. Guten Morgen. Hola. Bonjour. Privyet. Kaifa hal? Hale shuma chatore. Ahlan wa sahlan. Marhaba. Buna. Mucho. Gracias. Swabi. Abballi kire. Hosh gal din. Anayo sayo. And thank you very much, everybody, for tuning into PTV World. You for sure watching World this morning. Alongside my very well learned colleague who happens to be Miss Haja Satti. I happen to be Shahzad Hassan Khan, and we hope and pray that everybody out there is doing wonderfully well and that you're ready to kickstart your Thursday with us. But first things first, hello Haja, how's been your Thursday so far?
Assalamu alaikum, thank you so much for introducing me. So it has been going good so far. Alhamdulillah, there are a lot of blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm grateful to Allah ta'ala. So, I was reading an article in a daily, and it mentioned about, how canines or the dogs actually, cry, and that sort of tears help in bonding with the, humans. So,
really?
Yes.
Okay.
And I can recall an anecdote which my father often recalls is that he says that when my dada passed away and his, corpse were there on the bed. So, he had a very, he had two dogs, pets, and one of them, he actually came to know that he passed away, and he was crying all the night, behind, under his bed. So I do feel, so this is what they say about the dogs, that he's the man's best friend, something like
true.
that,
That's
right?
true. And in addition to that, there's one more research too as well. So every time when you go back home, because I love pets, I love dogs and horses, I think I cannot live without them.
Right.
So what happens is that every time you go back to your place, they already know that you are there.
That's true.
And they're going to
wagging their tail like that.
And they're going to welcome you, I think, more excitedly every other time when you're going to go back home as well. And it's their tactic of getting all your attention too as well. And this is what research tells
and someone was telling me, she happens to be psychologist, and she said that, your pets, they actually, takes all of your negativity from you. I don't know whether it's a scientifically backed thing or not. And they always spread the positivity around you. So, they always say that, interact with the pets, with the nature more, because, they're going to spread positivity about it.
I think I've never experienced that because there wasn't a bit of negativity inside me. But yes, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I think for everybody who's out there who's having a great time, please make sure that you continue to do so. But if you're not, and even if your kids are struggling, and if you think that they certainly do not have other siblings to look around, I think you can give them a pet, and it will actually give them that consciousness of having somebody. It will give them empathy too as well, and you will see how they start to bond. And once they start to bond, I don't think that they will require your attention too as well, because that's how pets actually look after the ones who actually give them love.
Okay, moving on to my favorite part of the segment, which is the news. And so, our Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab, he has thanked Amir of the State of the Qatar for the Qatar Investment Authority readiness to invest $3 billion in various commercial and investment sectors in Pakistan. Prime Minister held a meeting with Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Amir of the State of Qatar, at the Diwan-e Amiri in Doha. The two leaders exchanged views on bilateral, regional and international issues. They expressed satisfaction on the upward trajectory of Pakistan-Qatar relations and agreed to work together to further strengthen bilateral cooperation in all areas of mutual interest. The two sides agreed to strengthen institutional engagement to increase bilateral trade. I think this is the step in the right direction, because that will ensure more FDI inside our country, and we definitely need this at this moment because there is global inflation, and some were talking about the global recession, which is also looming on the crisis when it comes to that.
And not just that, in addition to that, to be very honest, I think our Prime Minister has been looking after the things very holistically too as well. So it's not just how important it is for Pakistan to have this foreign direct investment. At the same time, he's very concerned about all the flood effects too as well. So ladies and gentlemen, when we come back to where a lot of people have been displaced because of the floods taking place this year around in Pakistan, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has directed the authorities concerned to expedite rescue and relief operations in flood-affected areas, considering the prediction of more rains in those areas. The Prime Minister, who is currently on a 2-day official visit to Qatar, is monitoring the rescue and relief efforts in the country for relief of the flood-stricken people. He directed the National Disaster Management Authority and all the relevant ministries and departments to collaborate with one another as consecutive rain spells were deteriorating the flood-caused destructions. He said that the flash floods had inflicted huge losses on the people. It was the nation's responsibility to support their countrymen. Wow, I think I'm in love with my Prime Minister. That's me being honest, and not just that. Sir, I look forward to meeting you at 4 p.m. today too as well. So I think I'm
Lovely.
excited.
Lovely.
And for all of those people who are out there, please pray for me too that it goes well and smooth. Yeah, let's do
Lovely.
this.
Okay, so moving on to a third segment or a third news, which is in April, Australian swimmer Jessica Smith was fitted with a Nexus hand made by English firm Covey. Bionic hands convert electric impulses from the muscles in the upper arm into movement powered by motors in hand, enabling a user to hold a glass, open a door, or even pick up an egg.
She's putting a mascara if that's what it is.
Yeah, lovely. And some rival bionic hands can be app controlled, but Pollard says the ability to talk to a single device set the Nexus apart. To do that, anonymized data is collected for every user, and a task is managed by partner net app. I think this is, how the technology is advancing, and the innovation in the technology is really, giving us so much benefits. But again, then it generates a lot of debate about, especially collection of the data and the anonymity and whether it is really anonymous or not.
And even not just that, imagine that, somebody else starts to operate from the same application and it's your arm, you have it on ye, it's your bionic arm and somebody else is doing whatever they do. And not just that, I think the irony over here is that, every time you move onto a street light, somebody will come in, without an arm too over here in Pakistan will start to beg, unfortunately. But majority of those people have arms. So people over here who have been gifted naturally arms by Allah Almighty are trying to hide over here, while people in the other part of the country are actually making arms so that people who do not have arms can actually have a great life.
Right.
And I think it's great.
And this leads to, more skepticism, when it comes to the data collection and whatnot. And then there are actually a lot of people, who are working on the data privacy, on, how that we should be more particular about it, because this is our data and we should take the ownership of it. And, the global control, the very skepticism there over the global control over the things. A lot of people are dissecting that concept, deconstructing it, and working against it. And talking about the news and more about it. So the Reuters digital report says that the trust of the people in the news have actually dipped.
Yeah. Other than Finland, I guess.
Yes. And to talk more about it, what are the repercussions, how the news organizations need to work so that there is more vitality into it, and so people could actually read or consume news more when it comes to that. You wanted to add?
So what I actually wanted to say was that for me, I believe that news is now tiring, and we certainly do not have ample space up here to kind of consume all of that, process it, and then go and have arguments. So there are multiple reasons where people say we do not watch news because we end up arguing. Then there are people who say that we do not watch news because it's tiring. Then there are people who say that we do not watch news because it's not trustworthy too as well. But in times of COVID, when nobody was going outside, actually the trust was somewhere here. But now, ladies and gentlemen, the Reuters report actually tells us that the trust has gone down. We really need to look into the reasons why the trust has actually gone down. But not just that, I think in addition to that, we really need to talk about the patterns, how social media is covering up that gap, whether they're covering up that gap or not. Because most of the time, about social media too as well, we say that everything you read on social media is not true. So where do we find that balance? For that, I'm very thankful to Hajra Sati Saiba, because she's actually invited somebody who's got some amazing CV too as well, not just that, an amazing profile. She's been working towards it too as well. You wanted to say something?
Yes, I really wanted to introduce, because she was one of the I would say intellectual giant in my class, and I think she was the only person with whom I can have a female, when it comes to that, with whom I can have a really interesting political conversation.
Yeah, sure,
I could have a lot of social conversation.
I'm going to sit back.
So conversation on the social issues, but when it comes to politics, so there were not many in our class who are actually into the news reading and news writing, more into that. So I would really like to welcome and introduce one of my good friends and intellectual giants, and she had a very impressive CV. Then she went on to the US, to get for her Fulbright scholarship. So she happens to be Minahil Shahab, and now currently she is working for the Media Matters for Democracy, and she's a program manager. Assalamu alaikum, Minahil, and thank you so much for coming to my show.
Assalam, and thank you so much for giving me such a wonderful interaction.
You truly deserve it. Imagine Hajra telling us that she was the only such child in my class with whom I could have these conversations. And even I struggle with Hajra at times, because Hajra always makes sure that she's going to see through a lens which is really relevant, And not just that, it is backed by research and it makes sense too as well. So
Jazakallah.
I think most of the time, 99% of the time, I just cannot disagree. So I literally agree partially, and that partially is 75%, and then 25% is me thinking, okay, probably there can be another way of looking at it too as well.
Right.
But very quickly, I think before we talk about the report itself, media matters for democracy is something which I still cannot get it, when we do know that the media really plays a role in sustaining democracy too, but we have seen that how they shift towards different political inclinations. So, how can we refer to it? How can we relate to it?
So, Media Matters for Democracy is basically Pakistan's leading media development organization. So, we work with journalists on their capacity building, and we work with journalists all across Pakistan.
Wow.
So, we do trainings on various areas. For instance, countering disinformation for one, investigative journalism. Environmental journalism, health journalism, all these different beats of journalism we cover, and we work with a very closely knit network of journalists on building their capacity, on how they can report better, how we can make the media environment in the country more viable. And so this is essentially what we do. I can get into the nitty-gritties of things, but one of the other things that I would like to point about Media Matters for Democracy is that we do a lot of groundbreaking research work. So we have done, if you go to our website and if you look at our initiatives, you'll see a lot of research publications that have come only in the past 2 years, including qualitative work on self-censorship in the country, workplace harassment against women journalism, cyber harassment against women journalists, and so on and so forth.
I think even on the freedom of journalists too as well, freedom of speech too as well, and how it's endangered too at times.
Lovely.
Wow.
So now moving back to the report, which is the Reuters digital news report, and it does mention and talks about the polarization, and they were talking about mostly about the UK-based organization. So they were talking about how Guardian is a very liberal, it has sort of leftist-leaning audience when it comes to that, and Daily Mail has very sort of rightist audience when it comes to that. But Manahil, do you remember that we read this theory in journalism classes where it talk about it's not actually media that is making your opinions, it is actually the opinion leaders that are making your opinion when it comes to that. And if you delve into Pakistan's journalism landscape, you will find that Dawn has a very leftist sort of views about it, and the news might have very rightist sort of opinions when it comes to that. So do you really believe that this polarization is caused by the news when it comes to that?
So what the Reuters journalism report, basically digital report, talks about essentially is that they essentially debunk the idea of polarization in audiences, and they say that there's a concept in political science called perceived polarization, and most of it is perceived polarization, where we think that the audiences are polarized, but when they researched it and studied it qualitatively and quantitatively, they found otherwise. But we have to factor in the fact that this report, as we were discussing earlier, is extremely Eurocentric and just takes into account like a few media environments in the global south.
They went into six continents, 46 different areas.
Yeah, but
out of 7 continents
but
in the
even
world.
If you look at the sample size, the number of countries from the global south would be under 10, right? So a lot of Scandinavian countries, a lot of European countries, US, UK obviously, but not as many from the global south. And we have a very, very different landscape here in Pakistan, where we see some of the factors that they identify that cause audience polarization, for instance, political bias, being a reason for polarization here. So if you have a political bias, you will, tune into a certain channel here in Pakistan because that will serve your political purposes. So saying that, reading the report, it was interesting because it was interesting knowing what's happening in those countries. But it was also interesting to like sort of ruminate over what's happening in our own media landscape, which is frankly much different from what we see in those countries.
And since you have mentioned about the media landscape over here, and Haja very rightfully said that we do have opinion leaders over here who actually form such opinions too.
Right.
I think this is something which Rashid Latif tells me on my other sports show, and he tells me that, you know, your job as a sports broadcast journalist is to break the news, not to give views to as well.
Right,
And that's the exact point which I want to talk about, where how people who are on television are thinking that they are the opinion leaders. Is that the case over here, or is it not?
So I'm not sure, because I've not frankly, you know, I don't know if I can make that conclusion on behalf of people who come
Alright.
on media, if they think
Or
that
for
they're-
whatever you have seen on TV?
So I do think that they think that they are opinion leaders. Because with us, you know, Shahzad, you see the way that news is presented, it's not just factual, it always comes through a certain lens, and it's
That's
very
true.
agenda driven.
That's
Yeah.
true.
So if you're watching news on a certain channel, you'd think, oh, this is happening in the country, and then you'd watch it on another channel and you'd be surprised and you'd be
Different.
like, oh, this is completely different.
True.
So it does come with a certain bit of bias, which is very unfortunate, because it's against one of the fundamental principles of news, which is that you have to be as objective as possible. Although objectivity, as we know, is also a sham now.
dream, yeah.
And now at JA schools, journalism schools, and all over the world, we're debating whether, you know, objectivity is something that we can really hold as essential news value, because there's always personal bias involved.
That's true, lovely. And you know, let's move on to the climate change part of the news that the reports talk about. So why do you think, you know, it's very tricky business for the news organization or the news desk to present climate change? Because, you know, the climate change news is mostly about very gloom and doom scenario that, you know, our planet is, you know, actually burning, and we are going to die because the planet is very ailing when it comes to that. And one of the reasons, you know, that report mentions is that, you know, why there is such a decline in the news consumption is because they're presenting very depressing news when it comes to that. So what's your opinion on that?
So climate change, the part about climate change was extremely interesting to me.
That's true. That's
Because we're one of the countries which is adversely affected
That's
by
true.
climate change, and you just
Not even contributing to it.
yeah, and like in the initial section of you talked about floods, and obviously we've seen that year after year we're struck with a catastrophe which is obviously climate change induced, and it's become such a reality. One of the things that the report mentions is news avoidance, or it coins the terms news avoidant for certain audiences who do not want to like consume any sort of news.
Right.
And one of the reasons is that it brings their moods down, or it depresses them, or it saddens them, or certain other things.
They
And
end up
especially-
arguing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And especially in the post-COVID era, we've seen that people really are trying to now avoid negative news.
That's true.
And if climate change news is presented, which it obviously is in that way, people are more likely to avoid it, and that's what we're seeing. Other than that, one of the reasons which I thought was also very pressing was that climate change is actually a really technical, now it's like a proper news beat.
True.
So we have news publications like thirdpole.net, which
That's
just
true.
exclusively cover climate change news in Southeast Asia, right?
Right.
So it's extremely technical, and you have to present it extremely comprehensively to audiences, which we fail to do as news media. And that's why we've seen an aversion from audiences in consuming climate change news.
So I have a very hypothetical observation. You know, while we were growing up, so it was a transition from our schools to colleges, we started to learn about how the ozone layer was depleting. You know, so there was this era of ozone depletion. Oh, yaar, badi kharabi ho gayi, UV rays and whatnot.
Right.
And then there was a time, there was another transition where we spoke about the Industrial Revolution and how, you know, all of that industry waste is actually harming the Mother Earth, right?
Right.
And then there was another phase where, you know, gradually we started off with climate change. And I think that the world is working very differently, where they just get everybody to do what some certain powers want us to do too as well. And this is what I've observed over a period of time, that after almost every 10 years or 15 years, the trend will change, something new will come in. Now, I think we're moving towards the water scarcity too as well from climate change. And then the media starts to project it, and now we have sustainable development goals. We have to fulfill them by 2030. We're nowhere close to that too as well. There's an added pressure. So how do you think that this hypothetical observation to some extent might be true, that they kind of continue to create these trends for the people to get on board?
Or they might be covering, the alternative narrative around the climate change, that
True.
it's not man-made. It's sort of a natural procedure that, occurs after every 2,000 years or so.
And we've had this conversation before too as well. Yeah.
So, I mean, the thing is that I really don't dwell into this narrative because I want people to recognize it as a problem and be proactive about it. And this is one of the things that we as news media have responsibility for and towards, which is that educating people that this is something real and it's happening. And there's which the Reuters digital report refers to as well. There's a field called solutions journalism, which is you present solutions to people so they are not dissuaded. They're not like, oh, well, the world's coming to end and it's apocalypse and let's all just run away. They're like, oh, these are solutions that I as an individual or as a community can take to avert this crisis. And that's the kind of journalism that we need to do, especially when it comes to climate change.
Okay, and just in my defense, there's one thing which I would love to present more to over here, because when we talk about trust in news, so it actually went up during the days of COVID too as well, because nobody was going outside. There was no climate change for the previous 2 years. Nobody was speaking about it. All of a sudden, Russia war starts, and everybody forgets about COVID too as well. For all of those media houses, because they knew that this is something which a viewer might probably do it, give it to them, and then later on, they move on to another agenda.
So like one of the news values that we study very closely at journalism school is timeliness. And timeliness is like extremely important with news. So something which is news today will not be news tomorrow. And that is why news cycle can be extremely frustrating. And as you mentioned earlier, people can experience news fatigue because you were thinking that it was something yesterday and it is something new today. And that sort of like stresses you out, it fatigues you, and you sort of want to break out of that cycle. So that happens. But unfortunately or fortunately, that's how news works, right? And maybe we can try with things like solution journalism to break that fatigue or to get over that fatigue. But otherwise, there's not much that can be done in terms of timeliness for news.
It needs to be there and then.
Lovely. Okay, so now moving on to another portion which the digital Reuters report highlights, which is about the newsletter and the consumption of the news through the email newsletters, right? So ideally, I would think that the news coming from the email or newsletter is sort of very old-fashioned sort of a thing. Yes. Is an old-fashioned thing, but the report actually mentions that how there is a surge in that, right? So what different do you think that news organizations who are sending newsletters via email are offering, which are not exactly there on their website when it comes to that?
So I'd point to a very interesting example. So Politico is one of the most prominent now digital publications in the United States, and they do a newsletter called The Recast, which I've subscribed to, and I get every...
How much do you pay for that?
Oh, no, it's free.
It's free.
The Recast is free.
Right.
So I get The Recast, and Recast talks about racial news or anything along racial lines in the United States. So it's tailored for an extremely niche audience, and it's news centered around that. And it's extremely fascinating to read, and I gain so much from reading it. So organizations, especially digital organizations like Politico, which are continuously innovating, they are doing things like that. I happened to talk to somebody at Politico, and they said that the next thing after Recast that they want to do is the criminal justice system in the United States. So a newsletter tailored around the criminal justice system in the United States. So that's a beat that may interest a very niche audience, but it would interest that audience, and that's a way of capturing that audience. So newsletters something which are new and a new format that many news organizations across the world are experimenting with, and are a great way of news consumption. And just like the recast, it's a very innovative way of presenting news and capturing the audience attention.
But I think that people who've actually decided to do so as well, and what they plan to do so is that, for a country which is ranked amongst the top countries in street crime or crime anyways, I think it'll be an interesting bit for them to discuss all of that too as well. But in addition to that, where she said that, there's a surge in all of those email papers which are coming into as well. But what I wanted to talk about over here is that the report spoke about how people want to save money too as well and unsubscribe and keep what they think is best for them too as well. Now, holistically, what we really need to kind of get out for our audiences is that when I look at the news, is for me to be more aware of what's happening inside my country, outside, all over the world. So wherever I sit down, that's my profession. I really need to have a good conversation. People should know that that the gentleman or the lady or whoever it is self-aware. Now, the problem over here is that over here in Pakistan, unfortunately, you look at the private channels and you see that you cannot trust neither of them. So you move on to one place, to other one, you hop onto another one. It's all agenda based, and you see that how the owner has an inclination towards some political party too as well. And so it's really hard for you to shape that, what you're trying to do for yourself in self-awareness too as well. So how do you think that all of these things can actually kind of fall in line? Because that's not what journalism we're talking about. I think journalism and its practices have always been very fair. You study about it. They have a basic set of ethics too as well. So how do we do that?
It's all theoretical, Shahzad.
I mean, obviously, even if it's all theoretical, that's where it's going to come down to, being subjective too as well at times.
Right. So, I mean, you're right. It's a extremely tricky media landscape to navigate, especially as a news consumer. And sometimes for instance, if you place yourself with the left, there's certain news organizations that you're going to read. But I think if you are somebody who's interested in forming a worldview which is more holistic, then you'll read and consume everything and then form a very informed opinion. And that's the way to go about it, and that's what media literacy tells us, right? That you form a very, very holistic, comprehensive opinion after exposing yourself to all kinds of news.
A majority of the content.
Right.
And yes, go ahead.
Continue, Manahil, sorry.
No, so I was just wrapping up that's the way to sort of
move forward,
surpass this.
So one of the trends that we were also talking behind the camera was how there's a rise of consumption in the podcast, right? And organizations are really investing into that, especially when it comes to the big names. So what sort of a trend do you think is existing in Pakistan? Do you think that our news organizations are also investing in the podcast?
So, I'm not sure about news organizations, but at Media Matters for Democracy, we work with a lot of journalists, as I mentioned. And in our network alone, I've seen a lot of people who are now experimenting with that medium. It's really, really great to see. One of the people, most notably, that I can remember on the top of my head, is this journalist by the name of Tuba Masood Khan, who does this podcast called True Crime Story, and it's an extremely interesting. If you've heard Serial or any of those podcasts, you'll find this extremely interesting because she unravels a murder case, and she does it through a long form narrative medium, right? So people are, and she had a lot of expat viewers when we talked to her. She had a lot of expat Pakistanis listening to her podcast, and a good local young audience as well. So I think this is a medium that is slowly coming up, but very slowly, and news media, especially mainstream media, can do much more about it because it's a burgeoning field, at least in the United States and Europe, and a lot of news consumers are tuning into podcasts.
And very quickly, your opinion about Twitter Spaces?
I feel I'll just say one word, and that's just to contextualize it to our surroundings, I think they're extremely toxic, because sometimes because they're unmoderated, they can just spiral out of control, where people are attacking each other personally. And that's why we talk about how moderation sometimes even in the comment section is important for news media.
Thank you very much for highlighting our profession. Moderation, ladies and gentlemen, is really very important, and you certainly need a moderator for such spaces too as well. But thank you very much, Minahil. It was wonderful to be in conversation with you, and thank you very much for expanding our horizon or our understanding about journalism too as well. Thank you very much, Hajar, once again for having such a great friend.
Lovely. And so now we are going on to the short break, and after that we have a very interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying tuned to PTV World. You are certainly watching World This Morning alongside Hajar Sati, and I happen to be Shahzad Hassan Khan. And now, as we mentioned, that we're going to talk about something really important. So, ladies and gentlemen, we really want to talk about the adverse childhood experiences and how to get rid of that too as well, because it's going to have an impact on your child's development too as well. So, how to do that is something which we will be discussing, and we're very lucky that we've actually been joined by Dr. Khadija Tahi Saiba, who happens to be consultant trauma therapist too as well. Hello, ma'am. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. Wonderful to have you. But first things first, we really need to draw the line where what comes under the adverse childhood experiences, and then move forward from here.
Adverse childhood experiences is a topic very close to my heart. And this is something that we probably think about, but we have never really spoken about it so loudly. It is something, the small T traumas, the small traumas that a child is picking up from birth, and sometimes before birth, before the child is in the mother's belly, and there are problems at home, there are traumas at home, the mother is suffering, there are loud noises, there are fights, there's bomb blast, wars. The child is not picking up all the vibes from the mother. The child is born, sometimes there's birth trauma. The mother is traumatized, the delivery does not go on well. Then the child is born, the mother is distressed, the mother has postpartum blues, postpartum depression. The mother does not have enough to eat. The mother does not want to eat because of dieting. They are they have different aspects. The parents are not getting along. That the child is a girl child and nobody is happy. It's a line of girls and the father is not happy. There is tension between the parents. When the mother is feeding the child is picking up vibes from the mother.
Yeah.
Now the child is growing up, he sees a sad mother, an abused mother, the mother is frustrated, the parents are fighting, there's enough to eat, there is a war going on, there is terrorism going on, the TV is so loud, it's constantly showing political tension, wars, anything. The child is picking up. The child now is ready to go to school and he realizes there are trenches outside the school. The school is not a safe place to go. Schools have been attacked before. In the school, the child is made to do terrorism parades. The child is made to do earthquake parades.
Emergency run, yes.
Emergency parades. In the emergency, one day he has to run out. The teacher beats the child. The teacher takes her frustration on.
So we got the idea because we do not have enough time today. So let's first of all speak about that. All of these incidences, how do you think will actually have an impact on the kid's behavior, and what are those behaviors which the child will exhibit?
Okay. So now if the child is nurtured along the way, right? If the child is looked after along the way, why do 3 children end up with PTSD or 4 children end up with PTSD or any chronic mental illness, and why do the other 6 don't? Because those children are nurtured, looked after, validated. They know that they have an anchor at home. They know that the mother is there, the father is there, the caregiver is there. They get enough validation, enough praise. They have a good routine. They know that when they're going to sleep at 8, wake up at 7, daily routine is the same. It's not that one day they are going to be at Nani's house, one day it's going to be at Dadi's house, and one day they are going to be at a party, they're going to sleep 12 o'clock today, 12 o'clock at night today, or 8 p.m. at night today. They're going to wake up in the same home or different home. All these things are very important. A secure daily routine, a happy mother, a mother who nurtures, a mother who validates, a mother who has time to praise the child, a mother who is not constantly saying, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you do that? It says that if you validate, if you praise a child 3 times, you can correct the child once. How often do we do that? Now I look back, the way I raised my children was do this, do that, do this, do that. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And what did the child say? The child doesn't say anything. As the children grow up, they become aggressive. They don't want to see you. Why should they sit with the parents? So that they can point it out. You don't eat well, you're eating junk food, you're doing this, your O-level result was not bad, you did not speak well to Dadi, you not speak well to Nani. They're corrected all the time. Did they get enough validation?
That's true.
Were they nurtured?
Lovely that you have pointed out this, and I would really like to ask you, do you feel, as a practitioner of, trauma studies, there is enough conversation around this topic, especially in a country like ours in Pakistan?
No,
we are so busy surviving. We are so busy fighting inflation. We are so busy fighting load shedding and water deficiency. We don't have time.
Exactly. So which is why I want to very quickly talk about EMDR2 as well, and it happens to be the eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So how do you think EMDR is actually a solution for somebody who's had adverse childhood?
Well, this is a very difficult name for a very simple therapy.
True. Eye movement desensitization.
Very fascinating, right? So Francine Shapiro, the American psychologist who made this, he said, sorry, I gave the wrong name. It should have been a reprocessing therapy. It reprocesses the traumas. So the traumas have collected. We can't go to the past. So, but we are in the present and we want to go to the future. So what to do now? We reprocess all these traumas. With time, your life becomes a tunnel vision, You're just seeing, we have to do this, 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 you don't have any positive memories, any positive resources. So what do? You do this therapy. Your vision becomes broader. You are able to pick up the positive things in your past. You remember that your mother, if the mother had beaten up 10 times, you just remembered that. The one time your mother praised you, you are able to get that memory back.
Let me think, when was that? Mamaji, if you're watching, when was that?
Okay.
Ki mera putter bada acha ho gaya.
Okay.
I think twice or thrice I do remember it, yeah.
Okay, I hope you don't do the same with your daughters, right?
Nobody does that too, man. That was for a lighter note, yeah. But I think for the beating I've gotten, you know, all my lifetime.
We were living in a different era. Let's not compare it that era with this
I'm
era,
not
because
comparing.
I do feel, you know, the beating I got, you know, I was corrected a lot
You
of
got a
times.
beating?
Yes, a lot of times.
All right, okay. So my sisters never got a beating, but obviously from mom they did.
Right.
But from Abu I only got beating like twice or thrice in my entire lifetime. But from my mom, I got a beating every single day.
Okay.
And I'm glad that I got that beating, because otherwise I might not be the person who I am today.
I think the boys, you know, get some sort of different sort of treatment when it comes to
But were you
parenting.
validated? During the day, were you validated? Were you loved? We used to have joint family system. If the mother, you know, sometimes the grandparents used to make a mess because they used to, you know, confront the parents, or they used to say the mother is wrong and this should have happened. But
Spoiling
the nurturing figures were more.
Right.
The nurturing figure. Now the
चल इधर आ पुत्र, कोई नहीं मसला, तुझे टॉफी लेके देता हूँ, समझ लेगा.
Today the nurturing figure is the maid. The nurturing figure is the tuition wali. The nurturing figure is the Maulvi Saab. Are they going to nurture their child?
No, not at all. And so
It's our responsibility.
So lastly, I really wanted to ask, because you know, when I was going through the research for this program, I came to know that, you know, self-help principles are extremely linked with the, you know, how we cope up with the trauma. Do you believe that as a practitioner?
The long-term effects of trauma?
Yes.
Yes. Trauma is going to have very long-term effects. It's going to change into a pathology.
Right.
Mental health. It is said that adverse childhood experiences, children with adverse childhood experiences have higher rate of getting myocardial infarction, higher rate of committing suicide, higher rate of smoking, higher rate of addiction.
Right.
All these things. And of course, the psychiatric illnesses are always going to be jumping on that person.
True.
So this child is going, if the child is treated.
Right.
And the solution is EMDR.
And CBT, trauma-focused CBT. And trauma. I'm not saying EMDR is the only solution. And if nothing else, the child is maybe gets a partner or somebody who's there to nurture, to validate. But as time passes, it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult with a guy or a woman with PTSD. That person is nurtured at the age of 50 years. No, then you need therapy. Then you need therapy.
Then you do not need nurturing too as well. Thank you very much for saying that. But in addition to that, when we talk about EMDR, reprocessing CBT, which you spoke about too as well, does it mean that we are actually trying to erase what we experienced while we were growing up?
No, it's not going to be erased. Your memories are going to stay there.
Right.
But the
outcome of that memory will be positive.
You will stop re-experiencing these memories, because they say that the trauma memory is frozen in time.
Okay.
There are certain experiences, when you go back to those experiences, they're going to be there like with the same emotion, the same images, the same body sensation.
Yep.
So you remember everything. I give my clients a very simple explanation. A traumatized brain is like a wardrobe, a dirty wardrobe in which you have thrown the clothes and closed the wardrobe.
True.
The moment you open the wardrobe, everything falls on your face.
Out.
So now with EMDR, you're just going to line all those clothes nicely, stack them nicely. You open the wardrobe, you see everything, nothing falls on your face.
Exactly. And I believe that's wonderful. So, you know, thank you very much, Dr. Saiba, for being with us. Lovely to be in conversation with you. And which is why, you know, I'm going to share another. I think it's a joke, you know, so for anybody and everybody can enjoy it, no discrimination, no nothing. It's just a joke for the people to actually have a smile, because, you know, so there were two people having a conversation about wives. I'm very sorry that I'm bringing this up today early in the morning. You know, while they were having this conversation, and the gentleman was like, hey, you know what, why do we argue so much? So the other gentleman was like that, you know, that the way men's brain work is that, for example, if you have all of these cupboards in your brain and you are to talk about home, finance, or kids, you wire yourself in a way that you're going to go to that exact drawer, you open that up, you see what you want to see. Well, he was like, okay, when we come down to wives or women, so you want to have a conversation about kids, they won't open the kids drawer. They will open each and every drawer. And then you really have to curtail it down to that point too as
You
well.
lose the goal, you lose the target.
But thank you very much.
Right.
I think, very sorry, the same can happen to men too as well. So, it was just a joke. Please make sure that you take it that way.
Okay, lovely. So that was a lovely conversation. So we are going to come again with another good episode,
Inshallah.
good guests with good research. So until then, it's a goodbye.
Goodbye. Good morning.